kids are little and can get their little hands wrapped around blocks, we will give them blocks to stack up and play with, and they have to learn how to balance those towers as they put them together. And sometimes those blocks that we give them have letters on them. And even before they can read, we put these letters in their hand, hoping that they begin to see them and begin to recognize the sounds that go with them. So this here is a P, and we might look at a little one and say, this is a P, and then we'll tell them it makes what sound? Pop, right? So then we slowly are teaching them not just that these are building blocks, but that there are letters that are building blocks of words, and that those words are the ways that we communicate. And we start to hope that they will recognize these letters when they're assembled into words, and they will know what they mean when we speak them, and they will begin to learn how to read them and speak them themselves. Now, as they build these towers, sometimes just for fun, they can knock them down, or someone else will knock them down, or gravity will get a hold of their tower and take that down. So sometimes as they are playing like this, they are building up, and other times they are tearing down. And if you think about the way words work, sometimes words build up, sometimes words can tear down. I begin to think that perhaps we carry around words with us like in a basket as of this, and that those words stick with us, words that are spoken to us and sometimes words that we have said. And I've actually begun to wonder if we're not deep down made up of words. I know we're physically like made up of cells and water and carbon and all that, but we are people that have language, and then words that we speak and are spoken to us can stick with us for a long time. And we can carry those words around, so that in some ways I think we might really be made up of words. I think of those same little kids, when they get to elementary school, some of them will be given a test, and then a word will be spoken, and we will say, you are gifted. And that word comes with all kinds of connotations and things that are going to happen because we have applied that word to them. And they then can carry that word around in their basket. And that may have its positive points, but it may also come with challenges and stresses someday. Now, while that kid is getting that word, there's another kid in that same class who is being told you are remedial, or you have challenges, or you have a disability. And now hopefully that comes with some positives of help and additional work at learning, but also then it can be a word that they have to carry around with them that has certain connotations. And then they'll go out to the playground, and some kids will be called fat, and some will be called too skinny, and some will be called freaks, and some will be called weirdos, and they end up with all of these labels that they can carry around with them in their basket. Hopefully there's some positive words that are coming their way as well. But then as they grow, those words can get more intense. All of us have words that we have spoken that we regret, that we probably still carry around with us, and the guilt and maybe the shame that goes with that. But we also have heard words that stick to us. In the letter we heard from the Ephesians today, it says a fair bit about not being angry and getting rid of that anger and that sin that goes with it. There have probably been times in your lives where angry words have been said. Things like, why do you always have to be so difficult? Or why do you always have to be so stubborn? Or you're the one that always causes me trouble. Maybe some of you were the kid that was the bad kid, and you didn't necessarily hear that directly, but maybe you heard it said about you, and that then became part of your identity, as you carried those words around you in this basket that makes up who you are with all of the labels and the things that we hear. So with all of these words that we hear, and some of them stick to us and we try to get rid of them, but they're kind of like a bad tattoo that you can't really cover up, we come to this passage from Ephesians. And it's not so much about the words we hear as it is about the words we say. It begins by saying, put away all falsehood. So don't speak falsely. Instead, speak truth. Now, truth is not always an easy thing to speak. Sometimes we may sit down with an addict and tell them the truth about their behavior. Now, those are not words that are meant to tear down, though they may feel that way, but truth can be tough like that, but still can be a word that builds up. And that's where this letter goes next. After it talks about putting away falsehood and not speaking evil, it then says that we ought to use words to build up. And when we use words that build up, it tells us that they are a gift of grace to the people that hear them. So when we can speak words that build up rather than words that tear down, even if those are tough words of truth or words of challenge, when they're meant to build up and when they're spoken in love, those words become a gift of grace to another person. The letter then goes on to talk about Jesus as a gift and says that Jesus is the one who gave himself for us. That's where we start to talk about where he takes on all of the broken, sinful falsehoods that we can speak. And then he did this because he loved us, and the thing that comes along with that is forgiveness. So if we take Jesus as a gift, and Jesus is this gift of love, and then it comes with forgiveness, we can start to circle back to the words that we speak, because we do not always speak words that build us up and build others up, but we speak words that we need forgiveness for. So here in this passage, you get this realm that runs from don't speak falsely, don't speak evil, speak words that build up because they're a gift of grace, and Jesus is really the gift that sits under all of that and the forgiveness that he gives us. Now, this is in the Gospel of John we hear today, right, about Jesus. And if you back up to the beginning of the Gospel of John, it says that in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him. Not one thing came into being but through him. And then it goes on to tell us that that Word is life, and that it is full of grace and truth. So if we're tracking all of this, Ephesians is telling us about not speaking poor words, but speaking words that lift up, and ties that to this gift of Jesus and this gift of life. So if John then tells us that Jesus is the Word, and the Word is full of grace and truth, then all those things go together. If Jesus is the Word, then when we speak words that build up, we're really speaking about Jesus. Now that doesn't necessarily mean I'm actually talking about Jesus. The passage also talks about kindness and being tenderhearted. So if I speak kind words to somebody that build them up, really what I'm doing is giving them a gift of grace. And a gift of grace is also a gift of truth, is also then a word that is spoken, and a word is the same thing as Jesus, right? God's word spoken into the world. If you go back to the creation story, how did God create the world? In the first chapter of Genesis, right at the beginning? Speaking, right? Said, let there be light, and it happened. So God's power has God's word has creative power, and Jesus is the same thing as the word, and the word is the same thing as grace and truth coming into our lives. So if we can speak words that are building up, then we are really having a creative power of God working through us to speak words of grace into the world that are a gift to people when this truth comes to them, and it really is the gift of Jesus that we bring them, whether we are specifically talking about Jesus or not. So if we take all of this together and then turn toward our culture and say, well, our task then is to use words that build up because that is a gift of grace, how is our culture doing at that? Not great. We've got this whole idea of fake news and lies and falsehoods that the beginning of this passage talks about. Right? Almost 2,000 years ago, they were already wrestling with people speaking falsely. And so when you get this whole narrative, it begins to make us question about what is truth. And then we say, well, no, there is no truth. There's just opinions. But then this text is telling us, no, there actually is truth. And when we speak truth with grace and love, then it is for the building up, and that is a gift. So we got that whole level of fake news and falsehood going on around us, but that's not the only way that we use words to tear down. This text also talks about slander. Now, you may not think of yourselves as walking around slandering people on a day-to-day basis, but you may gossip. And anytime we say, hey, did you hear about that person over there? We're beginning to speak words that tear down. And whether that person hears those words or not, they tear us down because we are starting to live in a space that is not filled with love and grace, but rather with the words that speak ill of other people. And then you can get into other parts of this passage in the letter. It talks about stealing and theft. And it says, if for those that steal, get a job and help some people, is what it really says in there. But stealing is one thing where we immediately can go to burglary and think of people stealing property. But we can also steal somebody's identity. Literally, like take their documents and find ways to use their finances and otherwise take advantage of who they are. But can you steal someone's identity by speaking ill of them? Can you ruin their reputation? Can you tear people down in that way? Of course you can. And then when you think about the legal documents that we have and how many people have been defrauded and had money taken away from them or lost their house because of pages and pages of words that are too complicated for most of us to understand. So all wrapped up in the ways that we live in the world are fake news and falsehoods and the gossip that we bring and the ways that we talk ill about others and the legal documents we create so people can steal legally from other people. And all of that then lands in this space of how are we called to go out into the world and speak words that build up. And what this letter tells us is that that is what Jesus has gifted us with. Because Jesus is the Word is full of grace and truth. so that we are then called to go out into the world and speak words of grace and truth. And when we do that, it is not our own word we speak, but the very word of Jesus, when those words are meant to build up. So, as we go out into this world, it is easy then, maybe easier to think about words that we have heard. So I want to invite you for a moment to just close your eyes. I'm going to ask you to think about some people in your life. So first I want you to think about who has been your greatest cheerleader. Who has been that person that has spoken words of encouragement and cheered you along better than anyone else along the way? Who has been your greatest comfort? Has spoken words that have helped you through grief or struggle or some other kind of pain or unemployment. They have spoken those words that have helped you through that part of your life. This letter to Ephesians tells us about tenderness and kindness. Who has spoken tender and kind words to you just when you needed to hear them? Who has spoken a word of challenge to you that you did not want to hear at first, but eventually it was something that grew you and built you up into a place that you appreciated being eventually? All of these words are things people have spoken to you. They are words that people have spoken to you to build you up along the way, and those words then are a gift of grace, which means they're a gift of Jesus, which means they're full of grace and truth, and all of this goes together. So as we live in the world, those are the kinds of memories we ought draw on as we go out into the world so that we can be people's cheerleaders and we can be the people that comfort people and speak kind and tender words, but also speak words of challenge and truth when they are necessary. And all of this is the gift that Jesus gives us. It's not something we come up with on our own. As I was thinking about the ways that we put words into people's baskets and fill them with affirmations and all of the rest of those good things we can do as we speak words of grace, I thought about, I was looking for these blocks yesterday. So in our playroom we have a whole bunch of little blocks, but we also have big blocks. And that's an E. So I thought I would spell the word grace with these big blocks. I spelled it wrong in the first service. But out of, how many letters are there in the alphabet? 26. So we only have 25 big blocks, and of course we're missing the R. So I couldn't spell grace. But then that got me to thinking with big blocks and little blocks, how God's grace is so big that we can't imagine it. Earlier, a few weeks ago in Ephesians, we heard that God can do abundantly more through us than we can possibly imagine. That's how God's grace works. We can't get our minds around Jesus being the Word and grace and truth and how God works through us to bring that as a gift into people's lives. But the thing is, that's exactly what God does. So in this whole collection of little blocks, there was only one R, one little tiny R. So we're going to spell grace with a little r to remind ourselves, did I spell it right? Yep. To remind ourselves that God's big grace, we are part of how that works in the world. Little as we may be and insignificant as we may feel, God continues to pour that grace into our lives over and over and over again through Jesus, who is the Word, who is also grace and truth. So that when we speak those words that build people up, we live in that space of Jesus' love. And it shapes us, but it also transforms others as they hear those words through us. And God drags all of us into this place of grace and mercy and life as God continues to build us up as God's people. Amen.